Hello everyone, Sidewind here. Today I'm going to be explaining the athletic skill in Pathfinder 2e. This deep dive is focused on showing you how you can use this skill in combat and out of combat to better be able to interact with your character's world. So to start, a quick summary of the categories I'm dividing actions into. These are based in Pathfinder and entirely based off whether or not you are trained or above in the skill versus untrained. Untrained actions can be used by anyone, but they still use the skill's modifier, which you don't get to add a proficiency bonus to. By default, this is just the ability score associated with the skill. In the case of athletics, this means that you just use your strength modifier if you're not trained in the skill. Trained actions, meanwhile, require you to be trained in athletics to use them. There's only one of these for athletics, but other skills have more. As a note, this video might get kind of long because I've divided the actions up into multiple slides due to the sheer number of them. Before I get into the specific actions, I also wanted to mention an important trait to keep an eye on while you're learning about the athletic skill. This trait is attack. Attack traits are applied to things like strike, kinetic blast, or anything else which involves dealing damage or an effect to a creature. A lot of the in-combat athletic skill actions give you the attack trait, meaning that you stack multi-attack penalty. What this means is after you use an athletics action, your future attack actions are at a penalty. For the first action, this is a -5 penalty, and for the second, it's a -10. This is the same reason you generally don't want to attack 3 times in one round. With the case of the athletic skill, however, most of the effects are dealt simply by succeeding on an athletics check versus a certain DC. None of them target AC, which can give marshals a bit more flexibility. And in fact, if you succeed with them, they can reduce the target's AC up until either their next turn or your next turn. The specific effect depends on the action. Athletics is the main way marshals can provide support to other marshals and even to casters in specific scenarios, mainly by reducing the enemy's saves through applying certain conditions. This first slide on untrained athletics actions is focused on ones which are primarily used out of combat, but the amount of time it takes in combat is also listed. The first action is climb. This is always used when you're attempting to climb up an incline. Without a certain feat, you're off guard while climbing. In combat, it takes one action to move the specified distance. On a success, you move up. The specific distance is determined in part by your proficiency in athletics and by the base of the skill. And on a critical success, you add 5 feet to whatever that number is. On a critical failure, you fall off and land prone. You'll note that a lot of the athletics actions don't have a failure effect. This just means it does nothing. However, the critical failure effect is far worse. A quick reminder on how that works. So, a critical success is when you're 10 points above the DC. Say the DC is 10. If you roll a 20, you then have a critical success. A success is any number above the DC, but less than 10 above the DC. So in the same case of a 10 DC, if you roll a 12, that means that you have a success. A failure is when you're below the DC, but not quite 10 below the DC. So if the same DC of 10, you would roll a failure if you roll, say, a 5. The only way you can get a critical failure on a DC of 10 is if you roll a 1 and don't have any bonuses. A 1 automatically degrades your degree of success by 1, while a 20 automatically increases it by 1. Generally, you have additional bonuses which make it so that you're less likely to hit failures, especially as the DCs rise higher and your failure chance increases. Without proficiency in athletics, you're not going to be able to succeed at higher DCs. Now back to the next action. Force Open is a somewhat situational one-action ability, which is essentially you're trying to bust open a door. The way it works is you just roll an athletics action versus the door, and if you succeed, then you break the door open, but you damage it. If you critically succeed, you break it open, but you don't actually damage the door. You have a -2 penalty to succeeding on this action unless you're using a crowbar. On a critical failure on a force open action, you jam the door, giving an additional -2 penalty if you weren't using a crowbar. Generally, this ability is only used in specific situations, and the most important thing to note is that it will apply the attack trait multi-attack penalty until the end of your turn. So if you force open a door and find enemies on the other side, then you will have a -5 penalty to attempt to hit one of them if they're right in range. The next action to talk about is high long jump. This is an action simply for jumping high or long distances. Typically, the base distance is 10 feet vertical or 15 feet horizontal, but these numbers can shift somewhat depending on your proficiency, your level, and your speed. On a critical success, the distance you move is increased. If you succeed, there's no specific effect, but if you fail, you move standard distance. A critical failure leaves you prone. This is a very common failure condition for athletics actions. What this essentially means is you have a penalty to melee attacks, a bonus versus ranged attacks, and a penalty to certain actions and saves, depending on what you're trying to do. The specific time the failure occurs is different based off the high and the long jump. On a high jump, you fall prone before you make the jump. So basically, you try to jump up 10 feet, and then you just fall back down on the ground. You do not take damage. On a long jump, you fall prone after the jump is taken, so the distance at which you would be trying to jump from to. Because to use a long jump without penalty, you have to stride at least 10 feet beforehand. If you have not done this, you take a penalty. These actions usually take 2 actions within combat, not 1 action, but you can take feats to reduce this amount. The last action on this page is the swim action. It's basically just trying to swim in water. On a success, you move, the critical increases distance. On a failure, nothing happens, and on a critical failure, you make no progress. This is somewhat situational and mainly applies in campaigns where you're near the water. There are feats that increase your abilities while you're swimming. It functions similarly to a stride action. If you have a swim speed, you very frequently do not have to make a swim check unless you're in rough water. Okay, so this next slide is also untrained actions, but these ones are more useful in combat. I understand the text got very small on these. That's because, quite simply, there's a lot of them. So the 4 major combat actions that you can do well untrained, but which you're unlikely to succeed upon without being at least trained, are grapple, reposition, shove, and trip. All 4 of these actions have the attack trait, meaning that if you're trying to use them to increase your chance of success, it's often best to use it on your first action, so that you have a higher chance of doing it, before making any other attacks. And some of them can also function to support your allies. The first action is grapple. The way this works is you roll athletics versus the target's fortitude DC. To use grapple, you need to have a free hand unless the target is already grabbed or restrained by you. Usually, for most player characters, this means you need a free hand. On a critical success, you restrain the target until the end of your next turn. On a success, they are grabbed until the end of your next turn. Or if you move, because if you move away from the target, you can no longer grab them. On a failure, you fail to grab them, and on a critical failure, you fall prone in front of them. Falling prone can provoke certain negative effects, such as attacks of opportunity, just so that you're aware of the risk. If you grab or restrain the target, they can still escape from your grab. This will basically be a stacking multi-attack penalty until they succeed. And if they fail, you still have them. The point of grapple is if you restrain the target, you reduce their reflex save and a few other abilities in terms of their ability to harm your allies. The only thing they can really do while grabbed is try to escape from your grab. And once they're restrained, that's even more true. So that very frequently is a way to prevent a target from harming other people in your party. Reposition is also an athletics versus fortitude DC. On a success, you can move the target 5 feet within your reach. On a critical success, you can move them 10 feet. So what this means is if you're on a square grid, you're standing in the middle of the 9 squares you can total effect, then you can move them to 1 square over in any of those squares. This is forced movement, meaning that some abilities may counter it, and it can also trigger some ally abilities or let you move them in position for a flank. Shove is very similar to reposition, but it's specifically pushing the target back 5 feet in the direction you move. After you successfully shove a target, you can move 5 feet in the same direction. So basically, if you imagine 3 squares in a row, and you're standing in square 1, target in square 2, on a successful shove, you move the target to square 3, and you move to square 2. This can be a way to get the target away from your allies again. Just like with reposition and for grapple, the critical failure condition for shove is you fall prone. Trip is the last of these actions. It is the only one that is rolled versus reflex DC instead of fortitude DC. The way it works is on a success, you knock the target prone, and on a critical success, you also deal a bit of damage. On a critical failure, again, you fall prone. The point of all of these actions, which only take 1 action each and apply only 1 multi-attack penalty, is that you can, as a marshal, affect the battlefield, move creatures around, and apply conditions which give your allies a higher chance of succeeding against them. Lastly, there's only 1 trained action with the athletic skill. This is Disarm. It's rolled as athletics versus reflex DC. Contrary to what you might think, a success on a disarm attempt only gives you a +2 circumstance bonus to your next attempt to disarm them, and the target has a -2 circumstance bonus to using the item unless they spend an action to interact and change their grip on it. Only on a critical success do you knock the item out of the target's hands. Thus, the target can still attack you with that penalty if they don't want to spend an action to adjust their grip. The critical failure condition on disarm is not falling prone. It's simply applying off guard to you against the target and any other allies of theirs until the start of your next turn. That basically amounts to a -2 penalty to AC, and you will also take precision sneak attack damage if relevant. Now I'm moving on to feats. There are a lot of athletics feats, but a lot of them simply modify the actions we've already talked about. In general, most of them just increase 1 action, but some of them may affect more than 1. Additionally, one of them alters your ability to impact creatures with the athletics actions previously mentioned, because by default, athletics actions can only be used against a creature that is up to 1 size bigger than you. I have also divided these into multiple parts due to the sheer number. So the start of level 1 feats is Armor Assist. This is a situational feat that lets you have a lower time to disarm armor based on an athletics or warfare lore check. Basically, it's for the situation where you get jumped in your camp and need to rapidly put on your armor. If that doesn't generally happen, it's a less important feat to have access to. The second feat is Combat Climber. It makes it so you're no longer off guard while climbing, and you only need 1 free hand to climb. So you can still hold your sword in your second hand. However, the feat explicitly mentions that you still have to have 2 legs and 1 hand free to be able to climb. Basically, you can only hold something in 1 hand. So if both of your hands are occupied, you have to put away one of your items to be able to climb. Hefty Hauler increases your bulk limits for max and encumbered. Basically, it lets you carry more stuff without taking penalties. Quick Jump reduces the amount of time it takes to hire long jump to 1 action. It also makes it so you no longer have to stride beforehand for either of these actions. This is the type of feat that just modifies what you can already do. Titan Wrestler affects that you can only affect enemies 1 size larger. It lets you affect enemies up to 2 sizes larger than you. And when you reach legendary proficiency, you can affect up to 3 sizes larger than you. Generally, this ability is crucial to take on small characters, because most enemies are large or larger in many adventure paths. Thus, a halfling very focused on athletics cannot affect anything bigger than a medium-sized creature, unless they take this feat. It's slightly less necessary for medium-sized characters, but it's still very helpful because you're going to eventually run into a dragon or something. The last level 1 feat available is Underwater Marauder. It makes it so you're no longer off guard when swimming underwater, and you can use slashing or bludgeoning weapons underwater without penalty. You do not need to take this feat if you already have swim speed and the ability to breathe underwater necessarily. However, the off guard, I forget whether it applies or not as is. So you likely want to check with your GM which set of rules are there. Now on to level 2 feats. When you first take your skill feat at level 3, you have access to these as well as the level 1 feats. It does not always mean these are better than the level 1 feats, especially in the case of athletics. The first feat option is Lead Climber. It requires expert proficiency in athletics, which you can gain for the first time at level 3. The way it works is whenever you are climbing, you can use the Follow the Expert action to act as the expert. If your ally critically fails on a climb DC, you can make an athletics check of the same DC, and on a success, the ally only fails. Essentially, this means that they don't fall to the ground. But if you also critically fail on that check, you both fall to the ground. The second option is Powerful Leap. This lets you jump up 5 feet without having to use the high jump action. Additionally, you add 5 additional distance to your leaps. So this basically just makes it so you don't have to use leaps in the majority of situations where it's relevant, and your leaps are far higher. The third feat option, Rapid Mantle, also requires expert proficiency. The way it works is whenever you grab an edge, this is basically the way you stop yourself from falling, you can immediately stand on the edge. Additionally, you can use your athletics bonus instead of having to use your reflex save. For many characters specialized in athletics, this is better because a lot of them are strength-based, meaning that their reflex saves are relatively lower. Thus, by using this, you can make it so you're less likely to fall off the edge. Lastly, the way this feat works is whenever you use Climb or Leap to within 5 feet of an edge, you can grab it and potentially climb up. The last level 2 feat is Slippery Prey. It requires strength proficiency in athletics or acrobatics. It lowers the multi-attack penalty on repeated attempts to escape from a grapple or grab to -4 and then -8 instead of -5 and -10. At higher proficiencies, this number is farther reduced. There are also 3 level 7 feats available with athletics. The first one is Quick Climb or Swim. These are 2 separate feats to be clear, but I put them together because they have the exact same effect. Both require Master Proficiency, and while you're either climbing or swimming, you move +5 feet on success and +10 feet on a critical success. And at Legendary Proficiency, you can climb or swim as fast as you move. As I said, these are 2 separate feats, meaning that you must take Quick Climb and Quick Swim to have the effect for both. However, the text is almost exactly the same. Wall Jump is a feat which requires Master Proficiency. The best way I can explain it is it basically lets you Mario jump once a turn. So if you are standing between 2 walls, you can jump from one wall to the other to the other. You do not have to use stride as part of this action, and at Legendary Proficiency in Athletics, you have infinite uses of this. So basically, you can do exactly what Mario does by that point. Water Sprint is also a Master Proficiency feat. The way it works is when you stride in a straight line, you can walk across water, but you must land on solid ground. At Legendary Proficiency, you can move in non-straight lines. So basically, if you have a 20-foot pond in front of you, and you have 25 feet of movement, you can cross the pond and stand on the other side if you're walking. Basically, think Jesus walking on water. There is only one other feat I'm mentioning in this video. This is Cloud Jump. which is a level 15 feat requiring legendary proficiency. The way it works is you can triple the distance you jump, and when you high jump, you use the distance jumped and the distance limit, but you do not triple the distance. Additionally, you can spend additional actions to jump even higher. So if you wanted to, you could technically jump, assuming 25 feet of movement, close to 25 plus 25 plus 20 is 70 feet in the air. And your distance when you long jump can be as much as 110 feet. This is a very ridiculous level of ability, which is characteristic of powerful anime characters. There is one other feat I did not mention in this video, but it is because this video is long enough as it is, and the feat is both rare and from an adventure path, meaning many GMs might not allow you to take it. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped you understand the athletic skill action in Pathfinder 2e.